Good afternoon, my friends. Welcome to the third episode of Woke History. We will be doing another probably longer episode shortly about the Stonewall riots and the reason why June is Pride Month. But in honor of the new law that Texas has passed, I wanted to give some teachers some out there some advice about teaching the Bible to children. Now remember, we're to teach the Bible in literature class and in Bible specific electives. So let's talk about how to properly comply with this new law and teach some of God's truth to our kids. I would suggest starting with Psalm 137:9, which, and all this, the, as my sources on this is, of course, entirely biblical because we're just going to talk about what the text says. And I am going to quote from both the King James Version to make the KJV onlyists out there happy, and the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition, which most scholars seem to prefer. But we're going to start with Psalm 137:9, which reads in the King James, "Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones." In the New Revised Standard, "Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against a rock." This is telling us that those who kill children, infants, will be happy because they're doing what God wants. Now, this is a desire for justice and revenge against Babylon because of the destruction of Jerusalem. But it is still about killing children. Let's also talk about the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is definitely one you should be teaching kids. We'll do Ezekiel 23:20, shall we? In the King James, "For she doteth upon their paramours, whose flesh is as the flesh of asses, and whose issue is like the issue of horses." If you prefer the New Revised Standard Version, she lasted after her paramours there, whose members were like those of donkeys, and whose emission was like that of stallions. Isn't that really a wholesome thing to tell our kids about how much this woman loved the size and eruption of the parts of her partners? But there's more. I mean, we can't make it all sexual all the time. If you want to do that, just teach the book of the Song of Solomon, or sometimes it's known as the Song of Songs, which is all softcore pornography. But we need to touch on some other things because we don't want children to be obsessed with sex. That would be very wrong. So why don't we talk about the book of Leviticus? Everybody likes Leviticus, right? That's the one that tells us how, like, that being gay is evil. So let's try Leviticus, some of Levitical law. And we're going to talk about Leviticus 25:39 through 4, or we're going to skip 39 through 43 because that is Israelite slaves. Israelite slaves wasn't so bad. It was indentured servitude. You entered it willingly to pay off your debts. It was for a short-term period. There were prohibitions against cruelty. And then they were released, and their children were automatically freed on the year of Jubilee, which happened every 50 years, regardless of how much extent, remaining debt they had. Um, let's talk instead about 44 through 46, which is a very important part of American history. Because Leviticus 25:44 to 46, let me look it up just to make sure I get it right. So Leviticus in 25:44 to 46 in the King James Version. "Well, thy bondservants and thy bondmaids, which thou shalt have, shall be of the heathen that are round about you. Of them ye shall buy bondsmen and bondmaids. Moreover, of the children of strangers that do sojourn among you, of them ye should buy, and their families that are with you, which they beget in your land, and they shall be your possession. And you shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them for a possession, shall they be your bondmen forever. But over your brethren and the children of Israel you shall not rule one over another with rigor. And the NRSVEU, for the male and female slaves whom you have, it is from the nations around you that you may acquire male and female slaves. You may also acquire them from among the aliens residing among with you, and from their families who are with you, who have been born in your lands, and they may become your property. You may keep them as possessions for your children after you, for them to inherit as property. These you may treat as slaves for life. But for your fellow Israelites, no one shall rule over the other with harshness. So there you go, folks. The American South, the Confederacy, did nothing wrong. The Bible right here spells out in black and white that as long as it is not of your own people, well, technically only as long as it doesn't even have to be your people, as long as it's not Israelites. But as long as they're the heathen, as long as they're the non-member of your religion and your peoples, it is perfectly fine to own slaves in the full chattel slavery sense of you own them, and then when you die, your children own them. There is no year of Jubilee. There is no freedom as long as they're not Israelites. And for one last one, I want to talk about a story that Christians love to cite to justify being anti-homosexual. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Specifically, we're going to talk about Ezekiel 16:49. Which in the King James Version says, "Behold, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom, pride, fullness of bread, abundance of idleness were her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy." In the New Revised Standard Version, Updated Edition, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. People will point out that the Bible also says it was about straight lust after strange flesh and sexual immorality. Okay, let's talk about the story for a moment. You find, by the way, the verse I'm talking about is Jude 1:7, which in the KJV even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them, in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. And then the New Revised Standard Version, likewise Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which in the same manner as they indulged in sexual morality and pursued in unnatural lust, served as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. Now, the common explanation of this in relation to the story in Genesis 19, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, is, well, of course it was strange flesh. The men of the city wanted to rape the angels that were sent by God, man on man, sexual assault. So homosexuality is evil. That's not what this story says. Even in this verse that I'm just mentioning, Jude 1:7, sexual immorality. Let's keep in mind in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, they wanted to rape people. They wanted to rape strangers in their city. And the Bible is very clear about the importance of hospitality. The verses we just talked about why Sodom and Gomorrah happened, was the treatment of the poor, the treatment of the outsider. That is your sexual immorality. It was the men of the city consciously making a decision to rape. Now, what about the strange flesh and the unnatural lust? Well, again, the easy answer is to go, well, man on man is unnatural. But there's something else going on here as well, which you can go back to Genesis 6. Sons of God who lusted after the daughters of men. The Bible also makes prohibition against humans intermarrying or having sex with angels. They didn't want to just rape ordinary men, which would have been wrong by itself. They wanted to rape angels. Angels sent by God. That is unnatural flesh. That fits Jude just fine, even if it had been two women angels, because humans and angels are not supposed to have sex with each other. God flooded the world to prevent that from happening. So, no, Sodom and Gomorrah was not about, oh, they were all having gay sex. That's not biblical. Ezekiel spells it out. It is about about how they treat strangers. It is about how they treat the poor. It is about their pride. It is not about consensual, normal sexual activity between any gender. We'll do a future episode talking about the Bible and homosexuality. I would highly recommend, and he probably doesn't even know I exist, certainly not this channel since it's very new. But I would highly recommend, if you're interested, going and checking out Dan McClellan's channel here on YouTube. I'll provide a link in the description. Dan is a biblical scholar who's forgotten more about the history of all this stuff than I'll ever know. So I recommend going and listening to him. But you can also read the verses I just laid out. Um, if people want us, if the right wants us to teach the Bible, okay, let's remember the parts the right doesn't want us to teach. Like Psalm 137:9 about how wonderful it is to kill children, or how the story of Sodom and Gomorrah that uses a bludgeon against homosexuals is actually a pretty scathing commentary, in my opinion, to get blatantly political here. It's pretty scathing commentary on how the Trump administration and MAGA treats foreigners in the United States, and their tendency to try to shut down any type of service for the poor. Um, the Bible is not the wonderful weapon that the right thinks it is, folks. I would recommend reading it, even if you don't believe. There is a whole lot of stuff that makes the right look really bad. There's a lot of terrible stuff, like Isaiah literally endorsing chattel slavery, or again, I personally think saying murder, how happy people will be to murder little children is awful, but it's in there. Keep informed, keep educated. Tune in. After I upload this, I'll be filming my second video, which will be about gay rights and why June is Pride Month. Until then, everyone, have a good night and study your history.